Alright, well, today we're talking about population geography. Moving into this section. Part of geography isn't just what the natural resources are, where they are, and how people use it, but who are the people? How do we find out here? Let's focus on number, composition, and distribution of people. What are their characteristics? And of course, the subset of that is demography, which is the just statistical study of population. Look at the numbers. Now, demography is just looking at one particular spot at a time, not necessarily looking at how they're related. That's population geography. But the numbers are inextricably important. Say the world is a growing population. 1991, world population was 5.4 billion people. By 2004, just 13 short years, risen by 1 billion people. It's a lot of kids in a lot of short time. In that time scale, about 77 million people per year, about 211,000 people per day, in a 13-year period. Or basically about 1 Little Rock per day, or about 5 Union counties per day being born around the world. Skip ahead a little bit. 2024, current world population is 8.04 billion. Now, demographers do sometimes is look at projections, see where is this going, how fast is the population growing, when we reach certain milestones. And whenever they have these projections, they usually have a high range, a low range, and a mid-range. Now, in the year 2000, the United Nations projected that by 2050, the world population would be about 9 billion. I think we're probably going to pass that. But it could level off. 9.1 billion by 2100, even 10 or 11 billion by 2100. But of course, the big question there is where are you going to put all the people, and how are you going to make sure they're fed and they got enough water to drink? Now, of course, there are several different things going into this growth. It's national populations are growing at different rates. Some are increasing rapidly, some are leveling off, some are dropping rapidly for various reasons. Now, one projection is that between the year 2000 and 2050, there'll be a 48% increase in the U.S. population. Why that? Because we have immigration. We're an immigrant country. People always wanting to move to the United States because we have so many opportunities here. Because what if we didn't have immigration? Population would be dropping. Situation they have in Europe right now, particularly countries like Japan and South Korea, they're not having very many kids this generation. That's what's happening. Population's dropping. Now, I understand about these projections with population. It's based on current numbers and current rates. There are a lot of things that can change it. A lot of things. For example, in 1938, the United States Census Bureau had a projection for the future of the United States, what they saw based on current trends in 1938. They predicted the United States population peak in 1988 at 180 million people. What happened? Well, they missed the mark. 1990 U.S. Census, actual number was 250 million. So they missed it by more than a third. Now, those are pretty smart guys. They're pretty good at numbers. What happened? A lot of things changed between 1938 and 1988. A lot of things changed that affected the numbers. One thing, World War II. That caused a massive population shift in the United States. People moved from countryside to the cities. But also, a lot of those veterans coming home from World War II, they came home and they had a lot of kids. Bought their own homes, had big families, went on from there. Plus reforms in immigration laws. More people started coming into the United States, particularly about the 1960s, 1970s. So that changed the numbers. But what's causing this drop in the native-born population? The kids of these World War II veterans, Generation X, they didn't have very many kids. And then they didn't have their grandchildren didn't have very many kids. So the population growth starts slowing. Because the numbers just show you direction. They can't necessarily predict the future. These projections are simply if everything stays the same. But it doesn't stay the same. There's always something coming along that changes the population, that changes these numbers around. People move back and forth for one reason or another. People have a lot of kids, people don't have any kids, or somewhere in between. It just depends. There are a lot of different factors that go into that. 1980s projections, for example, predicted there'd be 12 to 14 billion people by 2050. But falling birth rates in declining developing nations have caused many of these projections to be revised downward. So not projecting that a huge growth rate anymore. So this gives us two things here. Remember, human population has grown rapidly in a relatively short period of time. 12,000 years ago, estimated human population, maybe from before present, somewhere between 5 and 10 million. Aren't a lot of us around. But by the 1800s, world population reached 1 billion. So just a little over 12,000 years, human population goes from not much to basically a whole bunch of people everywhere. So again, that comes down to what happened. Among other things, the agricultural revolution. People shifted from becoming these nomadic tribes with very high infant mortality rates and very short lifespans to living in settled communities. Rapid advances in medicine, so infant mortality rates fell, life expectancy rates extended, more food available, so people were living longer and healthier lives, so population jumped. You got to understand, humans have been a lot. We forced ourselves to the top of the food chain, so we don't have any natural predators to hold the population in check. the natural predators we got rid of. Because a long, long time ago, our ancestors decided we don't want to be someone else's lunch. Very fortunate they made that decision. We got migration, technology, medicine, more stable food supplies. That's helped the population increase. In fact, even developed countries like the United States, uh, food supply is so stable, it's not something we even think about. Well, I expect we go to the store, we're going to find something to eat. That's how stable our food supply is. We don't understand all the things that go into growing food, processing it, and shipping and distributing it everywhere. We always assume there's going to be something there. So, a couple of vocabulary words here. Crude birth rate. What's called birth rate. Live births per 1,000 people. They put it in those terms because you have you have different sets of people, different areas, different numbers of people. So let's kind of put it in perspective. For example, go to Florida. You may have some little towns, little neighborhood, maybe about 5,000 people, but absolutely no births. But it's a little town about 5,000 people, a few miles over, very high number of births. So what's the difference? One's a retirement community, the other one isn't. So look at the numbers. Look at the numbers behind the numbers. So, thinking of these terms, suppose you have a country with a population, let's say 2 million people, and they have 40,000 births per year, in which case the crude birth rate would equal uh, 20 per 20 births per 1,000 people. Now, crude birth rate is at its highest in Africa, followed by Western South Asia and Latin America, but mostly in poorer rural areas, agricultural areas. And there are a lot of births that are still unrecorded. See, it's only in the 20th century that all states in the United States even had such things as birth certificates, recording births, where they're happening, when they happen. Because first birth certificates only came to law in Arkansas in 1914. So there are a lot of people around the world who just, on paper, they don't exist. There's no record of them. They very much do exist, but whatever country they live in, this doesn't have a record of them. But in poor rural agricultural areas, you have higher birth rates because a lot of people on farms working the lands, they need a large families, that they have a built-in workforce. My great-grandparents had 10 kids. They were farmers. Their kids decided they didn't want to be farmers. Um, Poorer areas, you don't have access to health care as much, which means you don't have access to things like birth control, things like that. And even social taboos against birth control keep people from getting access to it, so they tend to have larger families. Because Men and women will do what men and women do when men and women get together, wherever they are. It's estimated maybe 50 million births per year undetected. Now, crude birth rate of more than 30 is considered fairly high, and about a fifth of the world population lives in those areas, again accounting for this rapid growth in this time period. Less than 18 is considered low. That's generally the Western industrialized nations. Transition is kind of between 18 and 30. The United States once had a very high birth rate. Mid 1800s, the average family had 5 kids. A lot of kids, but again, a lot of them didn't live to reach 18. Um, but a lot of changes in how we live, where we live, and how we work. Um, that changed also. That changed our birth rates also. Like I said, religious beliefs, cultural beliefs, they can inflate and deflate birth rates. There's some small sects that don't believe in um, reproductive activities at all. They are voluntarily celibate. They don't last too long. But some are the opposite. They openly encourage it. But there are others that only get to ban contraception, so they have very high birth rates. For example, in a lot of Muslim countries, contraception is banned, so they have high birth rates there. Roman Catholic Church has long disapproved of it, so generally tend to be higher birth rates in a lot of Roman Catholic countries. But ironically, though, a lot of people in Roman Catholic countries, particularly in Europe, they are moving away from the church or waiting to have kids, so they aren't having as many. So they have very low birth rates. Total fertility rate. The average number of children that would be born to women if they all had children at the current weight for women. Example, the 1980s, total fertility rate in the United States was 2.2 children. Okay, it's less than that. Which also brings us to the idea of replacement rate. That is, who replaces you when you go? Who replaces you in the population? That's what replacement rate is. That is, what's the number of kids that keeps the population stable? That's generally fertility rate 2.1 to 2.3. Why isn't it exactly 2? Accidents, illness, injury, infertility. Not everyone can have kids. People get sick. People die. A friend of mine I grew up with died in a car wreck when he was 23 years old. Had a newborn daughter, never got to see her grow up. Another friend I grew up with, he was 23, died of a massive heart attack just It's one of those weird things. Actually, had a kid, and then he was gone. But replacement rates, though, like I said, and while you can replace them in numbers, you can't replace the person. You can succeed the person. You can fill in the blank, but kind of the shoes they fill, that's always kind of hard to fill. But globally, let's look at replacement rates. Worldwide, you had a total fertility rate of, in 1965, at 5.0. By 1985, that had dropped to 3.7. By 2003, down to 2.8. In the more developed countries, 1985, about 2.0. 2000, 1.5. Anyway, that's a generation go by now. So that's dropped even further in the developed nations. But compare that to less developed nations. 1960, over 6. 2005, down about 3. Again, this is because of family planning efforts and efforts to promote contraception around the world. That led to lower birth rates. Because kids are great, but you got to be able to take care of them. Got to make sure they're fed, they're clothed, they're sheltered, they're educated. Got to make sure that they're taken care of. So that takes effort, that takes resources. And not everyone has the resources to take care of a bunch of kids. Actually, I have 6 kids, but they're spread out in age between 10 and 23. And I was always fortunate I had the resources to take care of them. If I didn't, though, they would have really suffered through their whole lives. Well, fertility rates in Latin America, they declined 55% since the 1960s. In Asia, by more than half. The smallest drop has been in sub-Saharan Africa, dropped about 15%. Now, how you measure people, demographers have a tool called a population pyramid. It's just a simple graph. It shows you the relative ages of people. You can break down for ages, sexes, for other demographic groups, religion or by race, but generally just showing you the population in terms of age and sex distribution. It's also called a population profile. It brings us to our little website we got here. And here's a website called populationpyramid.net. You can see here it has a current world population, relative projections based on current rate, going from 1950 up to 2100. And we're actually right about the halfway point now. But you can see from the population pyramid worldwide what the populations are. How many little kids there are. between the ages of 0 and 4. Right now, estimated about 337 million boys, about 319 million girls. Total world population between age 0 and 4 is about 8% of the world population. A lot of kids. But yeah, something you may notice, a lot more boys than girls. Yeah, generally there tend to be more boys born than girls, but boys tend to die at a faster rate, accidents and so forth. So you start getting to this point here, it's into their 50s and 60s, generally tend to be more women than men. Get to the top here, number of centenarians in the world is about 3.5 million women over the age of 100 and about 1.1 million men over the age of 100. Again, almost 3 times as many women living past the age of 100. What you see, though, is a fairly stable population. Said the bulk of the world is, yes, it's over 18, but you got a lot of kids. And here's what's going to happen over time is this group is going to move up to this one, and this one up to this one. Or in 20 years, this group here is going to move up here to this bracket, and they're going to start having kids, which is going to start producing this bracket again. And generally, people can have kids, generally biologically, teenage years, but men can have kids usually throughout their lives. They can at least produce kids. Women, they once they get into their 40s, they go into menopause and just can't have kids anymore. Which is, but the number of kids men can produce decreases over time. So yes, it's no, it's not a bad thing that the older you get, you can't have as many kids because it wears you out. But you see here is the population projection. Right now, 8.045 million. But next year it'll be up to 8.1 billion. And according to this projection, current rates hold, population will peak about just under 10.5 billion by 2085. So another 60 years, world population will peak and start a gradual decline. Now this is just world projections. So let's look at some different countries here. United States of America. Again, this is fairly stable, but you notice here, kind of towards the bottom, not as many kids as what you see up here, further up. Like I say, my generation here, the numbers are a little bit smaller, kind of starting to decline a little bit. Baby boom generation, they're 70s, and they're starting to move off the scene. And of course, the millennials and all the generations after that, they're starting to come on the scene. So with this, generally have this kind of generally straight up and down pattern here. It means a generally stable population. But if it say there would be a whole bunch of people up here at this end compared to this end, that means it's an aging population. Which means you got demographic pressures here on the lower end of it, means declining population. Or if you have a whole bunch here on this end toward the bottom, means you have a very young population. Now each situation presents its own challenges. As governments, you have to learn how to meet the needs of the people. Healthcare needs change between the young and the old. Like I say, for the younger people, you have to be able to figure out where are they going to go to school, where are they going to go to work when they get to this age. And at this age, They can take care of old age pensions and housing for senior citizens and things like that. What happens when the bulk of your population gets to the point they're too old to take care of themselves? It doesn't happen to everybody, but it happens to a lot of people. So right now, current population, 339 million. It's about to hit 340 million. It's generally moving upward. Year 2000, about 279 million. 1980, 225 million. As you can see where the demographics are going to go, by 2050, 374 million. 392 million by 2085, and about 394 million by 2100. The population is expected to level off by that point. But again, a lot of that is because of immigration. Of native-born Americans aren't having a lot of kids anymore for all sorts of different reasons. But we'll show you where population kind of becomes an issue here. For example, go to China here. They've talked about China's falling birth rate. 1970s, they instituted a one-child-only policy in China, try to limit the rising population, which was rising very rapidly out of control. Well, okay, kids born in that time period, it's from this age down. You have a very large number of people here in their 50s, but not as many in their 40s, 30s. And the number of kids being born is dropping steadily. Okay, so when I talk about China's demographics problem, because this large group of people are getting older, but not as many people here at the bottom who are going to be able to work and care for them. Which means over time, a shrinking population. As it reached its peak population, at least in current demographic terms, a couple of years ago, it was 1.425 billion people. As it reached 1 billion people here in the 1980s. It slowed down considerably because of that. So the one-child policy had an effect, but the problem was people got used to having only one kid at the time. And so many people living in these new urban cities, it's expensive to live there. It's cheaper just to have one kid. So what's going to happen to that over time is, well, population will start dropping. Just a little bit here at first, then more and more as these fewer number of kids get older. Example, fast forward this 20 years from now. This population here will be here, and these people here will be about here. So these kids are going to have to take care of these people. And so, if the current trend holds, they don't have many kids, population start dropping. And by the 2070s, population dipped down below 1 billion people. It's basically, in 1980, they start off with 1 billion people moving upward, and by 2080, come out the other end. 1 billion people and population dropping. Again, that's going to have problems with their economic planning because there are certain kinds of jobs you need to do in society that do take a lot of physical work, a lot of physical labor. What happens if you don't have a population that's able to do that? Say, work in a factory or pave highways or do contracting work, building and constructing and repairing homes. So good, honest work, but that's physically demanding work. Problem they're going to have. Well, let's look at some of these other countries. Say, go to Congo, heart of Africa. That's one of the highest birth rates in the world. And you see, it has just the opposite situation here. An extremely large number of kids. A good bulk of the population is under 20 years old. But of course, you don't have a lot of people living past 100 years old. 6 million people, they'll have 8 people over the age of 100 that are recorded. How many kids under 4 they have? Yeah, about 851,000. Which means a very young population. So since a young population, a lot of kids, that population is going to move up. This is Congo now. It's a population of 6 million now, but by 2100, population of 17 million. In the next 75 years, the population will nearly triple at this rate. Democratic Republic of Congo, same situation, an even larger birth rate. Apparently a population of 102 million people. They have about 18.7 million children under the age of 4. It's a lot because they don't have very much money. They don't have very much health care. So they also have a very high infant mortality rate, very high child mortality rate because they don't have the means to take care of these kids. That's why it drops so rapidly. Life expectancy is not very high in a lot of these countries. It's a very young population, very short lifespan, so this drops very rapidly. So the population, say, of 20 million people in 1970, today 102 million. By 2050, it'll be 266 million, more than double in the next 25 years. And to 423 million by 2100. North Korea. They're saying a population of 26 million. They're saying this what their birth rate is, but they are so paranoid about giving out any kind of outside information to the outside world. We really can't be sure if these numbers are accurate or not from North Korea. But most of our best guesses come pretty close to this population, about 25 or 26 million. Even it's expected to drop. Surprising it's as high as it is because very little food to go around. In the 1990s, there was a massive famine that left a couple million people dead. Dominican Republic. Got a fairly young population, but about 11 million people living there right now. But expected to peak here about 2060, around 13, 14 million people. Gradual decline. That's an interesting kind of study and look at these, look at the numbers and so forth. You look at some of the demographics here. Name me a country. Any country. How about South Korea? It's the lowest birth rate in the world. Population of 51 million, twice the size of North Korea, but again, very few kids. About 1.4 million under the age of 4. The bulk of the population here at this age, between their 30s and their 40s. Problem is, this demographic is not having very many kids. Bunch of different factors for that. It's very expensive to live in a lot of the urban areas of South Korea. A lot of pressure to make sure your kids get into the best schools, best universities, which usually takes money. Social pressures. I say a lot of women just don't like how they're treated by a lot of the men over there, so they're just not getting married. They can live on their own, be independent, so they just don't have a lot of kids. Why be with someone you don't like? And that's a shift in Korean culture that is have been a male-dominated culture for many years, but women are slowly, steadily asserting themselves in South Korean society. But it's not all the fault of women. It's again, um, it is expense. It is personal choice. Because what contraception has done is, and family planning has done is, it's given people the ability to decide how many kids they want. It's not just kids come along when they come along. It's you decide when they come along, more or less. But look at the problem it's going to have for South Korea. Yeah, it's got a population, it's peaking right now about 51 million people. But fast forward a couple decades here, 2055, 42 million. And then 24 million by 2100, dropping. But it's about 20 million here in the early 1950s. Not growing very rapidly. Why? Korean War. Huge civil war, massive disruption of the population. But afterward, people are calm, they're happy, they're relieved. They have a lot of kids. That's this demographic. They had a fair number of kids, but then just dropped off. All right, Russia. Looks a lot the same, doesn't it? Yeah, they had kind of a baby boom after World War II, like we did here. Population peak for them at 148 million. It's not counting the whole Soviet Union, just what was in Russia. Afterward, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, massive economic problems. A lot of people leaving Russia in large numbers, people not having many kids, so there's a real drop in the population. 143 million, stabilized a little bit at the beginning of the century, 145 million, but they're not having many kids. So Russians, by and large, especially when you get outside Moscow and St. Petersburg, very poor country. They have a lot of oil, but all that oil wealth goes to just a handful of people, the oligarchs, Putin and all those guys. And with a war going on, who wants to have a bunch of kids to send them off to war to die? No, you don't. So the population dies even further. The population drops even further. A lot of people having left the country because of the war in Ukraine. So yeah, by 2045, population will be down about 135 million. 85, 116 million, and 112 million by 2100. Let's look at Italy. Again, had a lot of kids after World War II, but people are not having many kids now. People live a good long life there, but in this demographic here, it's baby boom population, and Generation X population drops steadily, and contraception widely available. Women are a lot more independent, so they don't get married to someone just to be married and have a bunch of kids. People taking longer to get settled in their lives and their careers, so they're getting married later. That's another thing that's happened. The average age of a marriage now is in the United States is 27. It used to be it was the early 20s. It's shifted. It means you're also having kids later, generally if you're having kids in a marital relationship. So yeah, Italy's population is peaks about 60 million now, part of it driven by immigration, but it's going to start dropping rapidly. Go to 2060, 48 million. 2085, 40 million, and 37 million by 2100. Let's look at India. Biggest country in the world today. Population rising steadily. They also having kind of bulge around early middle age. They're not having as many children. But even that's going to start affecting the population. They're going to peak probably around 1.7 billion by the 2060s. And population generally start trending downward. But it's a neat website. Shows a lot of interesting things. Shows, among other things, population density per country. how many people living per square mile. United States, kind of a medium range, 34.5 million people per square kilometer. But again, it's kind of scattered out. There aren't a lot of people living here in South Arkansas. So we have a fairly low population density. We go to cities, larger cities like New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Dallas, very high population density. I'm going to give you the classic example. Union County, where we're at right now, population about 38,000. The surface area of Union County is equal to the area of New York City. The 5 boroughs. You could squeeze those into Union County, and you could, because it's the same size, be 8 million people living here. It's also the same size as Rhode Island. Yeah, we're as big as the whole state. Not a big one, but we're the size of the state. Got 1.4 million people living there. That's 1.4 million people living here in Union County. So we got a lot of open space here. A lot of areas where not a lot of people are living, but you also got a lot of space where a lot of people are living. So you got different areas with different population demands. So transportation infrastructure much more of a priority in larger cities. In smaller areas, not so much, because you don't have any people using these facilities as others. Canada, very low population density. Why? Second largest country in the world, but a population of only about 40 million people. And 90% of Canada's population is within 100 miles of the border of the United States. This area here, the St. Lawrence River Valley, New Brunswick, Vancouver area, mostly very empty space here, particularly a lot of these islands here near the Arctic Circle. There's some areas very large population. The Netherlands, 424 people per square kilometer, for a population of 17.6 million people. Ireland, 71 people per square kilometer for 5.65 million people. The United Kingdom, 278 people per square kilometer. Population of 67 million people. Again, you have, but the bulk of the people are living in southern England, in and around London. Go to northern Scotland, not very many people. Russia, 8 people per square kilometer for 144 million people. 144 million people scattered across 12 time zones. So yeah, you have a lot of empty space in Russia. Iceland, not a big country, just not even 400,000 people, but they got about 3 people per square kilometer. India, very dense population. The United States is larger than India by size, but it has less than a third of the population. 434 people per square kilometer. South Korea, 516 people per square kilometer for 51 million people. So yeah, that's not a lot of space for a lot of people, especially on an isthmus, surrounded by ocean on 3 sides and a lunatic neighbor on the north. Yeah, those are some issues you're gonna have to deal with there. Not a lot of places you can put people. Japan, a very large population, but also facing demographic decline. 326 people per square kilometer for 123 million people. Here, let's say Gaza Strip, Palestine, the West Bank, and the West Bank, and Gaza, very densely populated area. The Gaza Strip, which is being fought over right now after the Hamas attacks on Israel in October, Israel's moving into this army, and the whole Gaza Strip, where a lot of fighting is, it's an area just only a little bit bigger than the size of the city of Little Rock. City, 200,000 people. Little Rock. Population of Gaza, at 2 million people. Imagine 10 times as many people in an area the size of Little Rock. That's what's happening. So yeah, it's a very tight spaces. So 892 people per square kilometer for 5 million people. Libya, just under 4 people per square kilometer for a population just under 7 million. Libya, we've got some of the hottest deserts in the world here in the south, so the bulk of the people are living here near the coast. Democratic Republic of Congo, 43, and so forth. Niger, 21 people per square kilometer. Brazil, 25. Pakistan, very densely populated country itself, 302 people per square kilometer for 240 million people. So on and so forth. But look at in terms of population growth. And this is for 2015. Population is dropping across many areas of Europe, particularly Eastern Europe, Southern Europe. It's growing, United States very slightly, 0.78%. Again, mostly because of immigration. It's dropping in Japan by this rate. Because Japan, they're not having a lot of kids either. China's growth rate is slowing. Syria has the lowest growth rate in the world. Population dropping the fastest. Why? They're in the middle of a civil war. Been going on for years. People trying to get us Syria as fast as they can. Oman, very high birth rate, 5% population growth. Again, a lot of the warfare next door, Yemen. Democratic Republic of Congo, Central African Republic, Chad, Niger, and Mali. Very high growth rates, the highest population growth rates in the world. And that's populationpyramid.net. So yeah, a lot goes into studying this, and a lot you can learn from it. It's useful for, countries use this for economic planning. They use it for infrastructure planning. Try to determine, well, one thing, what are you going to need? Are you going to need schools or are you going to need nursing homes? That's something countries have to plan for. And yes, it can help people project what they need in terms of education, workforce, and so forth. So it's very useful to have this kind of information. But again, always the ultimate disclaimer, it's based on what we have right now. It can change. It can go up, it can go down. Don't know. So, that's it for today.